Okay, Prudence became a teacher in 1968, TM teacher, when she just had turned 20 years old. And that was her dream to get there. At that time they didn't go. She'll be talking about that in detail. But she's been a teacher since 1968. She's taught thousands of people how to do transcendental meditation. And as you all know, the Beatles wrote the song Dear Prudence about her, and then she'll talk about that. But since then, she became a mother, had 3 children, raised the 3 children, and then when she was in her 50s, she went back to school, got a BA, MA, and PhD in Sanskrit at Berkeley. It's not an easy task. And you'll see tonight what kind of person she is. I don't think she needs any more introduction than that.
Thank you. So we have someone, Arthur, who knew me when I was a new teacher, when I came back from India. You were in New York, right, in 1968. And he had long hair. And I did too. But anyway, I get more of it. But anyway, so I was going to ask you if you had questions, or I can launch right in. Does anyone have sort of a burning question you want to ask me, or shall I get started sort of talking? I think I want you to know why I wrote the book. I mean, a lot of people, it's called Dear Prudence, right? And a lot of people think, well, this book's going to be all about the Beatles and the time in India. And it is at the end. But it has this whole lead into it. And the reason it has a lead into it is because I wanted to explain why the Beatles wrote that song about me. And over the years, I've heard so many people tell me why the Beatles wrote that song about me. From that I was a heroin addict to that I went crazy. Can you see me all right? Let me make sure you can all see me. Otherwise, I'll go up. Just pull your chairs out, because it's not that organized. Just make sure you can see me, because I don't want to be talking and you're sitting watching the back of the head of the person in front of you. So can everyone, you all comfortable? You can see me? Okay. Okay, so I realized that, that nobody, over the years I realized that, nobody really knew why that song was written. And when I try and explain it and say, well, I really wanted to meditate a lot, people would, kind of their eyes would glass over. Either they weren't interested at all, or they had no idea what I was talking about. And so then it took so much to explain it that I just let it go. And I forgot about kind of being Dear Prudence. When the song was first written, I got some attention, and as the years wore on, I got attention here and there, but I basically avoided it. And I forgot about it. And I say in the book, in the beginning, that it was really my grandson who made me remember Dear Prudence. He said to me, Grandma, I want you to come to my school and meet my friends. They want to meet you. And forgetting about Dear Prudence, I just couldn't imagine why his teenage friends would want to meet his grandmother. And I said, why? Shem, why would your friends want to meet your grandmother? And he said, just come, Grandma. And when I went, to my surprise, there was this very interesting group of young people who knew everything about the Beatles, knew all their music, knew their stories, and they asked very interesting questions about the future, about, what was it that, was the magic? What was it that the Beatles felt that we could have a world in peace, and things like that. They really asked questions that were coming from deeper inside. Now, my children, who were a generation above these kids, They weren't ever interested. I would try and tell them about the Beatles and the song, and they never wanted to hear anything. So this was quite a shock, but also it was a wake-up call, because I realized after talking to them that those 60s, it's been sort of not whitewashed, but forgotten. The most important part of what the 60s were about. And that was, it's going to sound very 60s when I say this, but that was about expanding our consciousness. About being more connected to the world around us, and just being more observant and awake. And a lot of the things that came out of the 60s, including the Beatles and all of that, the Beatles were so important to us because they resonated with us. They were our voice. So do you remember that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the reason their music was obviously good, but what really made them magic was they were going through what the rest of us were going through. So they were expressing what we were all going through, and what we were going through was an identity crisis, a collective identity crisis. Because we grew up, the 60s people, we grew up in a world that followed a world war, a second world war. And it was the Cold War. And, we had used the H-bomb on Japan. I mean, not the H-bomb, the A-bomb. And we developed the H-bomb in the early, I think, 1953 or something. And so the destruction that we were capable of as a species, as a human group, the magnitude was enormous. It had never been like that in the history of man. The kind of destruction we could do, which would be self-destruction. We could annihilate ourselves. We could annihilate ourselves. And there was always this feeling that there could be another war. But what makes our generation special, among other things, was that there was also this protection where our parents, through the whole Disney, Walt Disney came out during that time, and there was television shows that were very positive, and there was this push to protect these children from what the world had seen before. But because of that these two extremes, where the reality was every third Friday we had the bomb alarms. You remember those air raid alarms?
Duck and cover.
Yeah, and everybody would have to go under their desks. Of course, we knew that was totally hopeless with, the radioactivity and the bomb and everything, but we would go through that motion. And on television, there would be these shows where the parents were told to get their kids out of the room. We were all ushered out, and they would tell them about, we didn't know, but in our imaginations, about the Russians coming, the war that was about to happen. So we grew up with this extreme sort of darkness. And then on the other side, we had this extreme hope with the whole Disney thing and the happy endings. Nothing ever ended in an unhappy way. Everything had a happy ending. So we grew up with this dichotomy where we were very positive, very hopeful, but extremely cynical. Doesn't make sense, but that was in us. Then a tsunami, as we were coming of age, a tsunami of events came about where we watched our president, who was so, he represented so much hope. He could speak to the black people. He could speak to all different people. He was young. He had children. He represented hope. And we watched him before our very eyes get shot. And that began a spiraling, and then we had the war, which nobody could explain to us. There were no heroes in the Vietnam War. There were no heroes. And there were a lot of questions about, why were we doing this, and is it right? So people were drafted in this environment where there wasn't a lot of support, and there were a lot of questions about what we were doing. We lost 50,000 people our own age, and many more came back with PTSD, which in those days, it didn't exist. They just came back crazy. No, I'm kidding. But they came back messed up with, and a lot of those people started meditation, because I was teaching during that time, and meditation was the only thing that helped them, and a lot of them went on and became TM teachers. But going back to the whole emphasis that when I gave a talk at one place in Tallahassee, Florida, someone introduced me, and he said, "I want you all to meet a remnant from the past." And I thought, actually that's very appropriate. Because it's very important. History's important. And history's important for those who lived through it, to remind them, how lucky they are at this point in time. But it's also important for the future generations. And going back to this theme of the 60s, the 60s, I said, were a special time. And we've seen it on the news and the media and in films where, we see the war covered, Vietnam War, and all the protests. And we see the movement where, people protested against racial discrimination. We also see the music from that time. But we don't see that consciousness shift. We don't see anyone telling that story. And that was an extremely important story, because all of you are living it now. Things such as yoga. Look at, in where I live, which is a sort of obscure part of America in a way, at least for me, because I was raised in New York and LA, is the panhandle of Florida. But on our little 12-mile stretch of land that goes along the water there, we have 9 yoga schools. The women growing up now are all doing yoga. Everybody's doing yoga. So we have yoga. We have farmers markets and organic movements everywhere. People are conscious of what they eat. You are what you eat. People are conscious of the environment. We have programs for, being more green and all of these things. All of that those foundations were laid during the 60s. During the 60s, what happened is that with the tsunami of events, is that you had these idealistic cynics coming of age. And there was also something that happened to accelerate that, and that was Timothy Leary. Remember that? Timothy Leary, when we were young, was, in the beginning, was a reputable Harvard professor. And he was talking about the mind, and that human beings can be more. That we don't have to solve our situations or our dilemmas through violence. That we can be more intelligent. That we can go deeper inside and draw from deeper resources inside and become more conscious. That was his original message, which a lot of us heard. Because we were going through this beginnings of an identity crisis where we were asking, who are we? We can't perpetuate what our parents have done. We'll just end up destroying ourselves. We have the H-bomb now. We can't perpetuate situations in the world with violence? Because look at our violence. Well, it turns out that H-bomb, which is a great deterrent, was a blessing in disguise. Because we haven't gone to war. We've had to, those countries that have it, have had to solve things in a different way, for the most part. And that's very, very important. But at that age, we didn't know that that would be the choices we would make, that it would end up being a deterrent. We only knew that in the past, if there was real differences, people went to war. And now, look at what war could do. So it made us look at ourselves as humans and say, who are we? You know, how can we enter the future in a better way? How can we become better human beings? How can we change the world? That's what you heard the Beatles saying. You know, and they were saying, like John, when he would be naked and he'd say, okay, let's change it by making love, but instead of war. But also there was this huge quiet revolution where we found that we could change our consciousness. We could change how we think, our perspective. And, I mean, things played into that. There was LSD. There was peyote, mescaline, psilocybin, and all those things that, you know, were very dangerous, but that also woke a lot of people up. I'm not saying that people should do those things, because I think now I teach in the yoga schools, and now the big thing is ayahuasca. Everybody's taking ayahuasca. She's the sister of mescaline, or the wife of mescaline. Anyway, she's female. Mescaline was male. I've been told all about it. But the point is, those things are dangerous. But I almost feel like they came at a time when we needed to wake up fast. And in order to perpetuate that, those of us who did wake up during that time and saw that if we were going to change the world, if we were going to become different human beings, more evolved, more conscious, we had to use the mind in a way that it's not used to being used. And this is where we turn to the East. We turn to the East for guidance, because in the East, long ago, there was a revolution there in consciousness where they asked those questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What is our purpose? What is this life about? You know, who are our fellow men? How do we sustain life? How do we make a better world? And so those questions were asked, and they found the answers. They found the answers in India long ago. And they weren't intellectual answers. We've had the intellectual answers in the West. We've had the wisdom of the East from the Upanishads. I mean, we had Thoreau and Emerson and people speaking about the wisdom that comes out of those lands. But we didn't have the living changes, the transformation. That's what we had to have. Enough of the talk. We had to change things. So what happened is we turned to the East for that answers. And in the East, you did have a culture that, talked about soma. Talked about soma. In the Rig Veda, a whole book is to soma, which is a herb. And they went through an awakening. And if you look at all the things that we call sort of the Sanskrit word, because I ended up getting a PhD in Sanskrit, but from Berkeley. But from yoga to Ayurveda to their law, to their music, to their drama, to every walk of their life. They had these sciences that were developed, that were brought out by what were called rishis. That's why those of us from the 60s were so attracted to India, because they had a culture that was run by these rishis. And these rishis were these people who explored consciousness, found the solution, and came out and ran an entire culture for centuries based on those things. And so that was very appealing to us. We could find an authority, because in the West there was no guidance. We were going through an identity crisis with no steering. And, you had Timothy Leary and all those people who didn't know what they were doing, gradually just spinning out into outer space. But those of us who were really serious about making a change for everybody, and sustaining it, that's the difference. Like when I teach at the yoga schools, they say, well, what's the difference between ayahuasca, mescaline, and and meditation, the transcending you do? And I'll say the biggest difference is that you can sustain what you get, and you can't do that with the other things. So when we went through that crisis, we did change. We were different human beings. We were never the same. And you, all of you out here, are our grandchildren. You're our children and grandchildren. And you grew up with our ideas and our realizations and our quests and our hopes. And for you, they're old hat. But the purpose of this old remnant from the past coming out is to tell you that you've got to keep going. You've got to keep going in what we started. Or else, we will not survive as a species. We will not survive, and our earth will not survive us. We have to bring change. And that's what we knew in the 60s. The people say, oh, the 60s was such a wonderful time. And they were wonderful in that you could walk down the street, and anyone else you saw, you immediately could pick up a heartfelt conversation. But the reason for that was because we were all in crisis. We were in crisis. So, there was no like, isn't the weather nice today and all this. It was like, are you surviving? I mean, what have you found out? Do you think we can make it through this period? And is there hope? Things like that. And so, what came out of that era that all of you have grown up with has to be continued, and you have to go further. It's like with women. We need to know our history. Don't take it for granted. People lost their lives in the quest of bringing freedom to women. We need that history. Well, we need this history too. Because we will not survive without becoming more conscious. We won't. And more conscious, it means more spiritual. Spiritual, what does spiritual mean? It means more awake. You have to wake up. We all do. We have to wake up. We're not here to just buy cars and, it's nice to have those things. It's nice to be with your family. Those things are very, very important. But we're here to live together and create a world that can last and that can be in peace. And we have to do this together. We can't do it alone. There's not going to be a Buddha or a Jesus that'll come and save us. And a guru, which has been corrupted, a guru is a master. It's someone who has mastered that particular art. And so I was studying in India under a great master of meditation, of going deep inside to infinity, of expanding my consciousness to connect with everything. Have you heard of Gaia? Yeah. So Gaia means that this earth, its biosphere, it's all connected. And when I said become spiritual, it means wake up to that reality, that we are all connected. We are one living organism. We are, we have parts just like your cells in your body, but we're one. And we've got to get it working right again. It's a mess right now. And so that meditation, I knew that my opportunity was limited. I only had 4 months, which is a long time, but it was the most amazing time of my life. In this profound silence, under a master of this. He knew everything. So that when I was, who knows where, he knew where I was. He knew what was going on. The whole tradition is laid out all the way. And that was very, very important. And far more important than anything like the Beatles. So this is why I didn't come out of my room. How could I come out of my room and experience and lose or give up what I was discovering deep inside of myself? If myself is yourself, is our self. We're all one. We're all one. And if you live that reality, it's a different way of living. It's a different way of living. And that essence that we live is life itself. That pure essence is life itself. And life has taboos. It has taboos, strong taboos, rules. And the biggest one is do not harm life under any condition. We find another way. We do not harm life. And that is what I live and breathe now. And that comes from that deep connection. It's profound. And that comes from that tradition that was kept alive in India. And this is what goes back to where we were saying, oh, Prudence has been teaching meditation since she was 20. That's what, I went to India when I was 19. And I did teach, and I did teach thousands of people. I'm still teaching. It's still the most important thing that I can do, that any of us can do, is to change our consciousness. Change our experience of this world. Become deep. Become enlightened. Get connected. Get connected. And you will live differently. You will be happy, but you will be living as part of everything. You will be living as part of everything. And that's a very happy place to be. You know, it's interesting. Mother Teresa was interviewed in New York. And I saw the interview. I was raised Catholic. And she there was a woman interviewing her, and she asked her, she said, Mother Teresa, how can you bear the pain, the suffering that you see day in and day out in the streets of Calcutta? How can you live day in and day out seeing that? How do you do it? And she said, yes, it's true. I see terrible suffering on the streets of Calcutta. But it is not as bad as the suffering I see in the eyes of the people of the West. The selfishness. Now, that's my addition. Our loneliness. Our separation from each other. From our world. That's the worst pain there is. And it's rampant through our culture. Rampant. This changes that. But you live for everyone. Because why? We're all the same. We all share the same soul. It was interesting when I met Maharishi. So it was an amazing experience because these rishis who are adept in this, they've opened a vortex, a hole, they've opened a part of themselves so that other dimension or that reality, that peace flows through readily. You can feel it. It's beautiful. It's alive. And so when I met him, I felt this incredible, unbelievable silence. I mean, it was, I describe it in some of the writing I've done and some of the interviews, that it really was like being in the eye of a Category 5 hurricane. The silence was so huge. It was unimaginable. I couldn't grasp it. It was so huge what I saw and felt coming through him. But also, second to that, I was meeting myself. Myself. I was meeting myself. And it was very, very profound because I had lost myself. A lot of people are the walking dead. I was. We're looking for our souls through our lives. I'll get this car, or I'll get these clothes. That'll make me feel happy. That'll give me security. I'll feel whole if I have this relationship. Or I'll have, complete love if I do this. Where did we get those ideas that we could have complete security, complete wholeness, everlasting love? Where did that come from? Certainly not from outside of us. There's nobody living that. It's not anywhere around us. It came from inside of us. It comes from inside of us. Why? That is our nature. It's whispering to us. And we've lost it. I mean, you can say it as a soul. We've lost it. And we're using the outside to fill that loss, to find it. It'll never give it to us. Never, ever. You can only get it from inside. Only place you can get it. Because otherwise it can't last. And what do we want? We want it to last. That's what we want. Because that's our nature. That's our soul. And it's talking to us all the time. We've lost it. But when you transcend, you get it again. And it begins to fill you. And you begin to have that connection with everything. And you don't live where the outside is being used to fill your holes. You live as a giver, as someone who loves and connects, who can love and connect. We all crave to love and connect, but we can't. We can't because the heart, they show a lotus in the yoga tradition. Does anyone do yoga? Okay. So they show a lotus, and that lotus flower is very delicate, very refined, and fragile in a sense. That's the heart. And it cannot open to the changes in this world without being grounded deep inside in its nature, in that unbounded part of ourselves. It can't open properly because it'll be hurt. But when it's grounded, it can open because it's not relying on the outside for anything. It's growing from the inside. So that's our nature. And that entered our culture in mass in the 60s. That was the great revolution that happened quietly. But it happened. And you younger people, you have got to continue it. You have got to continue it. We can have a world that works because each generation that comes is young and new and has an openness. The old crew, okay, forget them, write them off. But the young ones are open to change. And so in the Arab world, which seems like such a mess, that Arab Spring was a great sign. It was all young people with hope who learned from us in the West that we could have a better life. I mean, the other thing that you all need to realize is that we are leading the world. If you've traveled anywhere, they all, even in the most obscure places in New Guinea, they wear baseball caps, have, smartphones, and are wearing blue jeans and listening to our music. We are leading the way. So the change is happening here, and the continuation of it has to start here. So that Arab Spring showed that the young people wanted what they were reading about on the internet, as they communicated with us here. And it didn't work. It was tragic. But their children and their children, it may work. And, I have great hope. I know it'll work, actually. It will work. If enough of us do this, if enough of us go deep inside and bring that deeper connection into our living reality and become more evolved, wiser, deeper human beings, then we will have a different world. And you all are doing it in your yoga. Yoga is not a small thing, but it's just the physical part. When you do Shavasana, right? You transcend your body. Well, when you meditate, you see nothing yet. So there's a lot we can do. And we're all in this world together, and this is why I wrote my book, is to remind those of us who went through that revolution that we're leading. When I went to my grandson's school, and I was like a superstar. I mean, think of anyone over 30 we couldn't even listen to, let alone grandparents. But they were listening to every word I said. Every word I said, they listened to. So we're still being heard. Our generation, the revolution that we went through. Now, this isn't to say that spirituality in this doesn't exist didn't exist before us. It did. What happened in the 60s, though, is a bunch of us went through it together, and it entered the culture in mass, in the collective consciousness. So that's the story of my book. I think it's a fun story. If you read it, it moves quickly. It's a spiritual journey, and a spiritual journey means you're waking up. But people who are not spiritual, who may talk about spiritual, but who are not spiritual, are not awake. They are not awake. Awake to what? Guide. The connectedness of everything, of all of us. And so let me open the floor now to questions before I ramble on and on. Let me ask, does anyone have any questions on what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Are you vegetarian?
I am. It's because another thing that we realize, that remember the saying, now I'm forgetting it, be the solution. Be the solution. If you don't believe in something, don't do it. If you see people, you have a dog and you say, people shouldn't eat dogs. They're animals. Okay, but what about all the other animals then? That's my own personal viewpoint. It doesn't mean that you have to be a vegetarian, because you don't. If you live the sacredness of life, the important thing is you're listening to yourself. You're connecting in a way that you're listening. By listening to yourself, you're listening to everything. You're in tune. You're in tune. You're in tune. And for some people that might mean eating meat, because they don't see that it's a wrong thing, and they have a sacred relationship with their life and how they live it and how they eat. They maybe don't just eat, whatever. So I'm not saying that you have to be a vegetarian. I am. Yes, I am. I don't believe in killing animals to eat them, in raising them, in creating many animals to die, to be eaten. No, I don't believe in that. But that's my own opinion. But be the solution. Always, whatever you believe, live it. Live it. Live it. Any other questions?
So you said that now most of the Western world is in a place of loneliness. There's a lot of selfishness. Mm-hmm. The world revolves around me, mm-hmm. which makes you separate yourself from your fellow man. Mm-hmm. And that's not a healthy place to be, which means you're not happy. Happiness, hope, they're synonymous with health. They're synonymous with health. And that also comes out of the East. Yeah. So do you think that with the awakeness that you were talking about before, that could actually really solve the selfishness part? Because yes. You said you guys went through it in the 60s, and then I guess somewhere along the way it was lost.
What happened is that we were in pain, and in the 60s we saw the solution, and a lot of us got relief. The war ended, and then, this is something that our memories are short. So then people went into their lives, had to make living, and, had children, and got away from a lot of these things. Some of us continued practicing these things and learning. and growing. And it's, you know, I mean, you're still human. And you still have to learn from your life. But you live in a different way. Because you're connected with your life force.
But do you feel like we'd have to go through like another crisis in
No.
order for that to happen?
No, we hope that doesn't happen.
Okay.
No, I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, crises make us stop and look around. But hopefully, no. I think that your generation and younger are going through a crisis. I think that, you know, there's very much a lack of hope. Because what you see happening isn't very positive in the news, everywhere. But on a grassroots level, there's a lot of really good things happening through the internet communication, through the yoga schools, you know, in the organic movement, in the green movement. There's a lot of people coming together to take care of our earth, take care of us, and that's happening. But it needs to happen much more. And it will only happen if we each decide, okay, I want to be part of this. I want to make a difference. And going to the Beatles, you know, in India, the reason the Beatles were in India was because of George. I mean, the only Beatles that were taking this course were John and George. Now, Paul came through for 2 weeks, and Ringo came for 4 days or something. But the only ones who were taking the course were John and George, and they were my sort of, what are called course buddies. So they were on the course with me, and we were sort of pulled together because we lived in proximity to each other in the little sort of what we call puris. And so we had these conversations I'm having with you that I had with everybody then. You know, where we were honestly, we said, you know, what brought you here to this very far out place? Because it was, I mean, we were in India, the other side of the world. There was no communication where we were. We were not only in India, which was far away, we were in a jungle reserve in India. And so we were there for 4 months to meditate. And we didn't really know, we knew from our experience that this was something incredibly powerful, but we had no idea what 4 months of doing this would do. And it was it was both glorious and terrifying at the same time. Because we were there and you know, we didn't know what it would be like after a certain amount of time. And you couldn't phone home, there were no phones. The electricity came on once a week, I think, for like an hour. There were all kinds of wild animals around us. You know, we were really doing this thing. And so, you know, there were the questions like, you know, what brought you here? You know, why are you doing this thing? I know why I'm doing it, but tell me why you're here. And so George, I mean, one of the things he said is that there's a revolution happening in consciousness, just what I said to you. And he said, I want to be a part of it. And I said, well, you are. Yeah, I mean, we have no choice. We are, whether we want to or not. And at that point, I was frightened, too. And I said, the world's going to change. You know, the world will change with what's happening to us. It's going to change. And one of the things, he gave me a perspective, because I expected it. I expected this revolution in consciousness to happen in the next year, you know, something like that. And he said, no, we may not see it happen. It's going to take time. And then he said, but I want to be a part of it.
And I'm dedicating the rest of my life to it. And I will do it through my talent, which is like Gandharva Veda, which is the music. We're brought out by these rishis. So they saw the world from this other perspective. And they saw that nature has rhythms to it in cycles. And those cycles, you can tune yourself to those. And music is one of the easiest ways to tune yourself. So they figured out the way to do that. And Gandharva Veda is, you can listen to melodies, but underneath that, the ragas are tuning you. So that you know when you go, like you've been in a busy day in town, and you just go stand by some trees or something, you know how you sort of feel yourself, you're sort of retuning. Before you were sort of going with the traffic and this and now you're sort of settling down and retuning. And so that's what that music does. Very powerful. All of those sciences are amazing. So that's what was going on in India. That's why we were there. We weren't there because a guru was there and we wanted to be with the guru and we wanted to grow our hair long and wear colorful clothes and, sort of think we're far out or something. No. I mean, it was a really serious, amazing time that began something that entered our culture that you all are living, but you have to become more conscious. You fast. We need you.
Do you remember any funny experiences from the trip over there?
Amusing?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Because they were like pranksters, weren't they?
They were. An incredible sense of humor. Yeah. And let's see. Well, I'm afraid I had lost my sense of humor during that time.
You wouldn't come out and play.
I finally got it back. Yeah, I was not coming out and playing. I was dead serious. But they were very, their sense of humor was amazing. And John was genius, really genius humor, because he could nail people. And it was very funny. But if you were the person being nailed, it might not be so funny.
Like, do you remember an example?
No. Sorry. My memory has gotten kind of rusty. I'm sorry.
What was play? When they said we come out and play, were they playing games? Were they playing music?
No, I think they were saying, come out and be happy. Because I would, for me, there were several things going on with my own sort of identity crisis as part of being a part of the generation. But I also had my own pain. And, just like any retreat, it's an introspective time. So it was my introspective time. And I'll tell you something. Now some memories are coming back. There was what I thought was amazing is that I had been raised in Hollywood. And all my life, I had met famous people. And one of the things I learned from that was that I never wanted to meet famous people. Because it was always a letdown. Like their talent was amazing, but the person, and in America, there's so much press and coverage, and you can become so famous here. In the rest of the world, it's nothing like America. America's really got fame down. It's amazing how we have it. And so a lot of these, incredibly talented actors and things,
you would see them in movies, and you think, oh, I've got to meet this person. Well, always it was like, oh, I wish I'd never met them. Because they were ruined by their fame. They were ruined. It went to their head. There's a King Midas touch, where everything that he touched, he wanted gold, So anywhere he looked or touched, it would turn into gold. So if you go for fame, that happens to you. You lose your connection with the world. We are what this guy, E.O. Wilson, have you heard of him? He's a very famous Harvard professor who did these studies with ants and bees. And he really brought to light this concept of what's called EU, sociality. EU sociality. And what it is ants and bees have that, where their society or their whole structure is so interlaced, and it has the worker bees and the this and everything, very ordered and very interconnected. Well, we humans are also, we're at the top of the species, but we are also part of that sociality. So we also function in the same way, which means we need to be connected for things to work properly. So when you break that connection, whether it be personally break it or you break it in a larger way, it's not healthy. Things don't work right. And so these, I saw that, with fame. You don't want fame. It's a curse. It's a curse. All of the things, basically, I grew up in the American dream. Where's the epitome of the American dream? Hollywood, right? Be beautiful, have all the money you want, big houses, at least 3 or 4, and be famous. It's hell. I never saw so much unhappiness. I never saw so much unhappiness. So that's not really what we want. It's not really what we want. And we need to get in tune with what we want. And the only way to do that is start listening inside, tuning yourself in a proper way. And that's why meditation is so important for us as a species. Very, very important. Extremely important. And not just any meditation. Now meditation is a term for just about anything to do with the mind. And that's not to take away from all those different practices. But the real meditation, where you do it twice a day, comes from when we were in the 60s and we went to India and we did a yogic meditation, where you transcend deeply and connect with your soul, with your essence. That's what we're talking about. But the funny thing that the Beatles did, they were pranksters. They were amazing. We would have a lecture, and we'd all be in a hall, and there were 60 people on the course. And so Maharishi would save the front rows for the Beatles. Well, one of the wonderful things that I saw about the Beatles, I didn't want to meet them. I really dreaded it, because I actually liked them. And they were going through their music was right on target with what the rest of us were going through. So I really didn't want to meet them. No interest, honestly. And I met John first. And he was so real. He's working class. That's so ingrained in him. He couldn't be a snob if he tried. But all of them were just very real. Maharishi said, okay, boys, I was in the group with them. He said, let's, give you your own section of the dining room so you won't be bothered by people the other people on the course. And they said, no, we don't want to be treated differently from anyone else. We want to be like everybody else. We refuse to take our own section. And same with the lecture hall, they had the front row saved for them. They gave those to the older women in the course. They gave those seats. But then they sat somewhere else, and John would turn around while Maharishi was talking and watch the rest of us. It was funny. I'm trying to remember funny things. And another thing was George got up in one lecture and said, Maharishi, this is so boring. I've got to get out of here. Because Maharishi would tell these things, and people would ask detailed questions, and sometimes they would get long, and I hope I'm not getting long with all of you. And so sometimes it was boring. I have to confess I was bored too. So yeah, they were amazing, wonderful. I mean, there was a woman there on the course who was older. She had lost her son, and she was there to heal. And she was having a hard time. And George, she didn't know who George was, and he would go and play music for her. And it was just very sweet. She had no idea who he was. In fact, after a while, she asked him not to come anymore. But he went out of his way, to do that. Nobody asked him to do that. So they were very impressive human beings who had it all and weren't ruined by it, which is very unusual. Very unusual. So that was really interesting to me. And I learned a lot from them too. It was very interesting. Anyone else have any questions? Huh?
Yeah, did your sister meditate? Your kind sister?
Yes, my sister learned meditation in India. So she and I share. We went to, you'll see if you read the book, we went to a Catholic boarding school in England together, and we lived with the nuns. So at one point, we wanted to become nuns. And so that was in us. And she and I share a spiritual relationship because of that time we spent in the school. And so, I had been telling her about meditation, and she was going through a crisis in her life. So she decided to go to India and heal. So she was there for that. So she learned there. But I had been meditating before that. And you'll see from the book, I tried to go to India the year before, and they wouldn't let me go. I was too young and all of that. And so I went to Lourdes. I had a trust fund, which I was supposed to spend only on my education, but of course I didn't. I spent it on anything I wanted. But I went to Lourdes. Is anyone Catholic here? Yeah, so I went to Lourdes for a miracle. It's a holy place in the Catholic Church, and miracles happen there. So because they wouldn't accept me, and they said I had to be 24, and I had to have finished college, and I had dropped out of high school. There was no way I was going to get to go in the near future. So I went to Lourdes for a miracle and prayed that I could go to India to study with this great master of yoga. And the miracle happened. I was able to go. And that's in the book. That story's in the book. So, any other questions?
Do you have any contact with the remaining Beatles?
No, I mean a tiny bit with Paul, but not really. Did you have a question?
I was wondering if you could talk about doing your PhD. Was it a kind of yoga for you?
Yeah, doing the PhD was really a thrill of a lifetime. You'll see from the book, I was not an academic. I didn't do well in school. Maybe people say, it's dyslexia, I'm not sure. Maybe it was stupidity, but whatever it was, I was not real smart in school. And so I dropped out of high school because, my way of dealing with not being the smartest one in the class was to be this, hippest, savviest one. So, life's lesson was where I was going to go to school. Forget about this other thing they call